Every Thanksgiving as a child, we would travel to where all of our relatives lived, Boston. It's a very exciting place for me. I loved going to Boston. All of the cousins, the funny accent, all of it was a lot of fun. It was there that I get to spend time with Aunt Bobby, and she was just so much fun. I remember being 12 and her asking me, "Sandy, do you want a tonic?" A gin and tonic? I'm 12. What are you asking me, woman? Apparently in Boston alone, soda is called tonic. Do you want a tonic? So I loved going to Boston, and it was just such an exciting thing after about 7 hours in the car. When I would get out, and I remember specifically one time I leapt out of the car and I ran and I flung the door open. I knew the same sitting room where they always stayed. I flung the door open, my arms open wide, and said, "We're here!" It turns out there's 2 identical houses on that street. This lovely older couple sitting at tray tables in front of their TV looked a little surprised. I ran out the door, down the street, past my parents with the luggage, into the real house, and I did not announce myself so excitedly the second time. That's just one of 1,000 memories of embarrassment, and it still has that twinge of embarrassment when you tell it again, or when you think of it. You probably have those memories too, all those different things. And the funny thing is, when you relive them, you get just as embarrassed as the first time. So it's understandable that we would want to memorialize and remember only the good times. Only those times where we were on top, those times when we were most accomplished. The pictures around our homes tend to be of those moments, of weddings and baptisms, fun times. We did not take a picture of the time I went into the wrong people's house, and it's not on the mantle. We want to remember all of those great times. That's what we remember, that's what we memorialize, even though what's in our heads is all of those embarrassing times. It's almost as if we can surround ourselves with enough of those positive time images that we can pretend that all of those embarrassing times didn't really happen. But they did. As a father, I found myself living behind a camera more than I should have. I think this is a common problem. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to capture those moments. I found myself behind the lens of a video camera. Eventually we got one with a little screen, and that's helpful a little bit, so you're not ignoring the world like this. You're just ignoring the world like this. Eventually, you look at the old photos, wonder where you are in them, and wonder if in trying to capture every single wonderful moment that might happen, did I cut myself out of the picture of actually living life myself? The Transfiguration, we read from the Gospel, that's basically what Peter does 6 days. It only takes him a week after proclaiming, "You are the Christ, I know who you are," and that's an amazing thing. Only 6 days after that, he comes up onto this mountain, this crazy scene. Jesus is hanging out with Elijah and Moses, and Peter whips out his video camera and ignores the whole thing by looking into the little screen. Okay, he didn't have a video camera, but what he said was, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. Can we capture this moment somehow? Can we stay here?" What he says is, "If you like, I'll build a little house. 3 of them, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. We can stay here in this moment." Of course, Jesus had life to get on with. There was ministry to be done. They had to get back off the mountain. There's a thing, and you'll have to, some of you will have to go with me on this. There's a thing called film. It's an actual thing you can touch. And when you used to take pictures of 24 exposures or more, you had to, in order to see what that image was, you had to take it someplace to be developed. And when you developed it, maybe you got doubles because you weren't sure if one of the ones you liked, you might want to give to a friend. What you ended up with was doubles of a whole lot of junk. The blurry photos. The photos where you took 3 or 4 in a row just in case the sun did something a little strange. And then you find yourself with boxes and boxes and boxes of blurry duplicates. And you never seem to throw them away. One year, on a wonderful vacation we took, where we went to a place where there was nothing to do. If you want a vacation where there's nothing to do, go to Hilton Head in January. It was wonderful. And I took the boxes and boxes and boxes of photos, and we went through them. We wrote on the back of them, who was this? When was that? And we threw away the blurry photos, and we got rid of the ridiculous number of duplicates. We put them aside, and some of them we had to tear to make sure we didn't have them in the right pile. I always wondered what the maid service must have thought of that trash can full of old photos ripped in two. But it was a great experience. Editing. If we were to know what the word editing room floor, where that phrase means, editing room floor, we'd have to go back to that time when if you took a video, you were making a movie, and you wanted to edit it, you wanted to cut and paste, that meant actually grabbing a pair of scissors. And in the midst of the creative process, and someone who edited a movie would have lots and lots of small bits and large bits of film on the floor. It would cover the floor, they'd be kicking it around because they couldn't stop to clean it up. They were in the midst of that exciting process of editing, getting all that other stuff that's not so exciting, all of that everyday stuff, the embarrassing stuff, all of the things that aren't the mountaintop experiences on the floor. That's what it means to be on the editing room floor. But we look for those big ones, the things we want to memorialize. This summer we found ourselves in Westminster Abbey, and if you've ever been there, you find out that it is like Grandma's attic. Except instead of a bunch of little figurines and tchotchkes, they're all about 15 feet tall. Stone memorials to this forgotten person, to that old war. They are stacked up in the corners so you can't even read the inscriptions of them all. I think there might be as much floor space devoted to memorials as there is to worship, maybe even more. Start to wonder about looking up from the little video camera screen and living life. Of course, coming home to Washington, D.C. doesn't look all that different. Lots of memorials to catch your attention. Look at what we did here. Look at that moment in history. Look at this president. Forget that president. We don't want to talk about him. Look at this president. Look at that one. We're going to put memorials everywhere. So what do we do with that? What do we do with a world full of memorials? What in your life would you memorialize? What kind of statue would you erect to things that happened in your own lifetime, in your own lives? A friend of ours that we knew from seminary has done a controversial thing. He's put a sculpture up in front of his church that's getting all kinds of bizarre press. This sculpture is making people uncomfortable, and they just don't know what to do with it. This sculpture was recently rejected by 2 prominent Roman Catholic churches in North America, St. Michael's Cathedral in Toronto and St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. The sculpture is a bench, 7 feet wide. It's in just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, or a section of it, Davidson, North Carolina. It's St. Albans Episcopal Church there, and this bench in front of it has on it a homeless person sleeping. That's the statue, covered in a blanket. And when you get up to the statue, it's only then that you realize, looking at the feet sticking out of the bottom of the blanket, that those feet are pierced. This is Jesus the homeless. That is the name of the sculpture. One local resident told the NBC station that she called the police the first time she drove by. It was so realistic, this bronze statue. And she explained that, I was concerned for the safety of the neighborhood. She protested, Jesus wasn't a vagrant. Jesus is no helpless person. It's not what I read in the Gospels, but I understand where she's coming from. Uncomfortable. The sculptor said that it was memorialized from Matthew 25. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. He explains, inspired by that, this sculpture is a representation that suggests Christ is with the most marginalized in our society. The Christ figure is shrouded in a blanket. The only indication that it is Jesus is the visible wounds on the feet. The life-size version of the work has enough room that someone is able to sit on the bench at his feet. He recounted that there's a poignant moment years before, in 2011, just before Christmas, where he saw a homeless person sleeping on the street. And he said, my instinctive thought was, that is Jesus Christ. I saw Jesus. So they memorialized that. Can we lift up those other parts, those other times in our lives, those other people, other than the presidents and the grand figures of history? I would tell you that the editing room floor represents most of life, and we are called to witness to Christ in our lives in the stuff of the editing room floor. Our God is a God of the editing room floor. Those times that are thrown aside, those times that we are thrown aside, and those other people who are thrown aside, all of that, Christ is there for them. In the gospel this morning, it says that after the disciples had fallen to the floor, after this miraculous vision of Elijah and Moses hanging out with Jesus, after Peter trying to say, let's capture this moment, there was a voice from heaven saying, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. They're freaked out, they fall to the floor, they are overwhelmed. And then Jesus came and touched them, saying, get up and do not be afraid. Get up and do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except himself alone. You know, sometimes we need the Jesus of brilliant light, hanging out with Moses and Elijah, and we celebrate that. But most of the time, we need Jesus to touch us, helping us, saying, get up and do not be afraid. This is the last Sunday of Epiphany. Epiphany is those moments where we see Jesus for who he really is. And in the very last Sunday of Epiphany, every year we have the readings of the Transfiguration. I wonder, is it more transfiguring? Is it more telling of Jesus as God, for him to be brilliant? Or is it more telling that Jesus is God when he comes to us, touches us, and says, get up, do not be afraid. Being disciples ourselves, we can celebrate our brilliant times. But most of the time, the world needs people in Jesus' name to reach out to them, touch them, saying, get up and do not be afraid.